Darren with Valley Implement, and today we're going to talk about a few things on this New Holland baler. It's a New Holland big baler 340 plus. A couple of things I'd like to talk about is the stuffer and the packer and some of the operations that take place on them. So what the stuffer and the packer do is they move the hay from the pickup up into the bale chamber. The packer moves it from the pickup and it winds it up and throws it up into the stuffer area right here. When the stuffer area fills up, then the stuffer fork goes down in and it puts a nice even flake of hay up into the plunger. When that takes place, the plunger compresses it and you get it. That's how you get a nice even firm square bale, is because of this operation here and how it takes place. So if we start up here with the packer is driven off of the main gearbox, and this is a packer slip clutch. This slip clutch has plates in it. If something comes in and a fence post or something comes in and stops the packer, rather than doing a bunch of damage to the packer, this clutch will slip and prevent the damage. So you can figure out what's going on and you don't have to have a lot of damage with it. This is adjusted with these springs. There's some shims here, and I'm not going to go into detail on the adjustments because the adjustments are a little different for every baler and whatever model you've got. This clutch does from time to time require some maintenance. The chain tensioner here, this tensions the chain, keeps it tight. Has to be adjusted from time to time with this spring. Another thing I'll bring up as I talk about the chain. Over time, this chain is going to stretch, and as it stretches, it instead of riding down in the bottom of these sprocket teeth, it rides up on the edges up here. And if a chain is run too long, not only will you end up replacing the chain, you'll end up replacing the sprockets as well. So when it's not good to run a chain right to the very end, otherwise you'll end up replacing sprockets. This chain eventually comes down and it drives the packer crankshaft down here. There's 3 sets of forks in here, and they work together to move the hay up into the stuffer. Some of the issues and things you want to look for back in here, and it's awful hard to get in here to see, but you can kind of see the fork right here. And this is the forks I'm talking about. This fork is greased from the lube system, and over time the forks wear a little bit, and there's a wear strip that we can weld on to the fork to make it wider and a little longer, which helps the hay pull in, especially in dry, brittle crops, that sometimes it'll bunch up in there and it'll rake through the hay rather than pull it in. These strips can be welded on and to alleviate that problem and help out with that. The other issues we have on the packer is we've got a connecting rod in there, or it's commonly called a dog bone, and occasionally these bearings go out. That's a point you'll want to look at and see. Wiggle the packer fork and see if you've got play in these bearings. If you do, these bearings need to be replaced. Also in there you've got grease lines. You can't see them because they're back in there, but you've got a grease line that goes to each packer fork, and those packer forks spin at a pretty high rate of speed, and sometimes those lines will get broke, and you really don't know it unless you get in there and look around and do an inspection. So it's good from time to time to get in there and make sure that the lube lines are still there and they're still greasing the packer forks. So like I mentioned, those packer forks move the hay from the pickup up into the stuffer chamber, and that's their purpose. We're going to walk around the other side. We're on the right hand side now. We're going to walk around to the left side and talk about the stuffer a little bit. So the stuffer is the second part of the feeding system. It is also driven off the main gearbox, but instead of having a chain on this side, we've got another gearbox that actually drives the stuffer. It also Off of here is a drive shaft that runs up and drives the knotter, so we don't have a chain on this side. which is a good thing. One thing to note is this gearbox has oil in it, and you'll see right here there's a sight glass, and that sight glass is an easy, quick, convenient way to check the oil in that gearbox. If you don't see anything in there, it's time to add some oil. Also, there's several grease zerks on here that aren't greased with the automatic lube system. One is real hard to see, but it's back down in on this ring here. There's a grease zerk that greases this ring and a bushing in there, and it's a common one that people miss. They see, for instance, this one. They'll see a few others around up in here, but this one's out of sight, kind of out of sight, out of mind, and they don't see it. So this needs, the flywheel needs to be rolled around to where you can see. Sometimes you can see it right up in here, sometimes you can see it down in here, but that's one that commonly gets missed in the greasing process. So the stuffer also has a lockout handle here. This handle is meant to be put in place like that. If you're working on the machine, that's meant to keep the stuffer from accidentally cycling. Of course, whenever you work on the baler, you shut the PTO off and the tractor off. But this is, if this tripped, it could possibly some linkage or something that could move. But so it's always a good idea to engage that when you're doing anything with the stuffer. Also, when you go to bale again, if this is engaged, your stuffer won't trip, and you should get an indication on your monitor that that's engaged. There's also a couple of sensors on this linkage. There's one right here. When this stuffer trips, which if you want, I'll trip it. You can see this linkage will move down in front of there. When that trips, this moves in front of that sensor and tells the monitor that the stuffer cycle is about to take place, so the monitor knows what to do and how to figure the pressure on the bell and a few other things in that process. On this same setup, we have a stuffer shear bolt right here. The shear bolt's right here, and it's a bolt like this. And again, if something gets in here, debris or something for some reason plugs this up, instead of doing a bunch of damage to the stuffer system, this bolt will shear, and this fork will fold back, and then of course you have to figure out what's going on, replace the shear bolt, and off you go again. This also has a sensor up here. When that shears, this arm comes up in front of the sensor, and it'll give you an indication in the cab that you've sheared a bolt, and it's going to warn you to stop and try to find out what's going on. Also, something else that's kind of neat is right on the back of this sensor, there's a little orange light right there. Something right there you can see. And that orange light is an indication that you're getting power to that sensor. And if you put metal up in front of it, you'll notice that orange light will go out. It's kind of a quick way to do a preliminary check on that sensor. Another thing you can look for, there's several rollers around on the stuffer system. Just make sure they're not locked up, that they're turning freely. And you can see several of them here. There's one here. There's a couple of bearings here that need to be checked occasionally. Notice the grease lines coming in. These grease lines, you can look and see if you're actually getting grease to these areas, which will greatly extend the life of the stuffer. So a few other things that we can do with the stuffer. So a couple of wear areas are right here where this stuffer trips. There's a wear plate right here that can be replaced as this wears, because as the stuffer operates, this linkage moves back and forth, and you get wear on this plate. You can get wear on this block. It's a common wear item. In the operation of the stuffer, we have this handle that is kind of a mystery to a lot of people, and you can see there's a spring on here. What this handle is for is it determines where you've got the set on these notches, how much material is going to go up into the stuffer chamber, and how often it's going to trip. So if this handle, kind of the recommended notch is 4 from the back. So if you count 4 up, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's kind of the recommended kind of all-purpose notch for a lot of different applications. Now let's say your bell is being made and you notice the top of the bell is kind of spongy and maybe doesn't have enough fill in the top of the bell. What you're going to want to do is move this you're going to want to move this lever up a couple notches. What that's going to do is that's going to allow more hay to build up in that chamber and give you a heavier square flake, so when it goes up into the bell chamber you've got a good square flake. For belling corn stalks, you're going to want to move it more down to this area, down closer to the first notch, which is going to allow less pressure to trip that stuffer, and that seems to be work better with corn stalks. There's really not a super hard setting on this. Number 4 from the back works for a lot of situations, but basically the thinner the flake you can make, the more dense your bell's going to be. So basically the further back you can get here, the better off you're going to be. You're going to have a better looking bell, a denser bell, but you can go too far with it. So it's kind of, I'd start on the 4th notch and fine tune it from there. As we look at our packer fork, this fork drops down in the process of baling. It drops down in and it makes its pass up through here. It puts that flake of hay up into the plunger. You can see the teeth on the back of here. Those teeth are meant to push the hay back down in if there's any buildup right here, and keep it down in the chamber versus having a bunch of buildup in here. Again, that's kind of an overview of the stuffer and the packer, how they work and what their function is. And I think we'll end there, and thanks for watching.